Hello folks, Dick Fairburn here. Today I want to talk about the 38 snub nose. Did a video on it a few weeks ago, a lot of views, a lot of positive comments. And despite all you whippersnappers, I got my old man t-shirt on today. And on the back it says, "Youth and inexperience is no match for old age and treachery." Couldn't have said it better myself. Some of you think if you're not carrying a high capacity 9mm with at least 18 rounds, gee whiz hollow points, red dot sights and everything else, that you are at a severe disadvantage for concealed carry, for self-protection with a handgun. But in reality, there are an awful lot of people out there carrying something like this. This is an old Colt Agent, alloy frame, lightweight, 6-shot snub nose. Smith & Wesson J frames are probably the most popular, 5-shot, smaller, a little bit lighter. They come in both steel frame and alloy frame. Alloy frame is much lighter, easier to carry, but of course you deal with more recoil. The J frames in particular can be had in 357 Magnum chambering. If you've got one, okay, you can shoot 38 ammo in it. If you are going to buy one, I think I would just buy the 38. A little bit shorter cylinder, a little bit lighter weight, and 357 Magnums in an alloy frame revolver are a beast. They're going to be hard on the weapon. If you shoot a lot of them, you're going to get it out of time. You're going to get end shake. But mostly you're going to get vicious recoil, and it's going to cause you to flinch and perhaps not shoot as well as you should. So 38 snubs are very popular for concealed carry. They're also pretty popular for backup guns for police officers. Some carry it on an ankle. Some carry it inside under their duty shirt or duty vest. But access to a small 38 as a backup gun, great idea. But there's a lot of misconceptions about what kind of ammo you should load in these things. Most of the 38s out there are 4-inch guns. 4 inches, a little bit more tube, a little bit more velocity, a little bit different performance sometimes in the way the bullets react in terms of terminal performance. Now, of course, the standard for terminal performance nowadays is 10% ballistic gelatin. This formula was developed by the late Dr. Marty Fackler, a U.S. Army colonel. He had started out his military career as a Navy surgeon and had a lot of gunshot experiences from a Navy ship off the coast of Vietnam, where he dealt with a lot of traumatic injuries, both bullet wounds, flak, various explosives. And his job in the Army was to educate doctors that had been taught with a gunshot wound. You had a permanent cavity, you had a hole that was drilled by the bullet, certainly, but they were taught that a lot of the tissue around that hole would eventually die, become necrotic, cause gangrene and possibly death. So they were taught to excise a lot of material beyond the bullet wound. And the theory was they were actually doing more damage than the bullet had in some cases. So his research was, okay, yeah, the bullet's going through, it's stretching beyond that permanent cavity, that permanent drill hole, but will that surrounding tissue actually die and go bad, or will it heal and come back? And what they found was they were cutting away a lot more tissue than they probably needed to. And he started with 20% gelatin, which came from an old Department of Justice test called the Relative Incapacitation Index. I've talked about this before. It used a computer model with several thousand little cubic divisions of the human body. They would shoot bullets into a 20% gelatin formula, figure the cavity, and they measured the temporary cavity, the splash cavity, how it impacted those various portions of the body, whether it was heart muscle, lung tissue, muscle, void. And they had also fired for accuracy, so they had a spread of I'm not sure the number, we'll say 6. So they would apply those 6 on a computer model, figure out which parts of the body were damaged, and give this a relative incapacitation index. It was a great theory, but it proved to come up with some very light, fast bullets. The most famous of those was called the Treasury load. It was a .38 Special Plus P, normally fired out of short barrel revolvers by Treasury agents and folks like them. And it was a 110 grain .38 Special Hollow Point Plus P. And towards the end, I believe they even made some Plus P Plus .38 ammo in the Treasury loads. But in that 20% gelatin, more resistive, that splash effect was more pronounced. Well, Fackler decided that that did not correlate to shooting in tissue, and he generally shot pigs to measure actual tissue. So he changed the formulation to 10% ballistic gelatin, and that got a pretty close match. So he could predict the depth of penetration, the degree of expansion. The splash effect was called a temporary cavity, and he said, you know, that semi-liquid material, the gelatin, would splash out of the way of the bullet penetrating through and then spring back. Hunters, if you have shot big game with high velocity rifles, you will notice that around the wound a lot of times there is what we call bloodshot meat, and it has driven blood clots back in the layers of the muscle tissue there. That's really what that temporary cavity is. Bloodshot meat. It will come back, it will eventually heal in a living creature, and while it's going to hurt like hell, it really doesn't do any permanent damage in terms of bleeding someone out. And to stop a human adversary, or an animal for that matter, there's really only two ways to do it. The first is shut off the central nervous system. So for the human, that's a brain or upper spine hit. Medulla oblongata at the base of the skull is supposed to be an instant stop. So if you hit the off switch, neurologically, they're down, they're out. They may not die immediately, but they're out of the fight. The second way is to perforate the thoracic cavity, lungs, heart, liver, other vital organs that are in there, and you're going to cause blood loss. When the blood loss gets severe enough and blood pressure drops low enough, they're out. And that will almost always result in death. So, short of a central nervous system hit, which very rarely happens in gunfights, we have to hit that thoracic cavity and we have to bleed them down to low blood pressure. The bigger the hole, the more damage is done, the faster you will bleed, and the faster they will be permanently incapacitated. So you have what Fackler called the crush cavity. That is touched by the bullet. If the bullet expands, and in one of the tests I'm going to show you here in a little while, I tested the new Federal Punch load. It's a .38 Special Plus P 120 grain jacketed hollow point. I'll show you close-ups of this, and I'll give you the numbers from my water jug testing protocol, which simulates 10% gelatin. The crush cavity is what is touched by the bullet, either non-expanded or expanded, permanently damaged tissue. The temporary cavity is that splash effect, and that will shrink back down. In Fackler's research, below about 2,000 feet per second impact velocity, he says the temporary cavity adds almost nothing to the permanent wounding of the individual. So while it's going to be impressive in gelatin or water, and while it's probably going to hurt like hell, it's not going to put them down any more rapidly because of that splash effect. Now, beyond 2,000 feet per second into rifle velocity range, what he found was the temporary cavity has much more power. He put bones in the gelatin, and he said when he would fire an M193 loads from an M16, even a full metal jacket, he said if that passed within an inch or so of say a femur, a leg bone, the temporary cavity would actually break the bone. It had that much energy. An even more important thing is if a bullet fragments and blows off pieces of itself, each of those pieces creates a new crush cavity. Now, it's a very small one, granted, and it generally will not go anywhere near as deep as the main part of the projectile. But those little secondary missile channels, when they get that temporary cavity that comes along a few milliseconds later, at the rifle velocities, it is so powerful it will actually tear the tissue along all those secondary paths. So at high velocity, a fragmenting bullet can massively increase the amount of permanently damaged tissue, increase the blood loss, and result in a quicker stop, whether you're talking about big game animals or humans. Now on YouTube, most of the time when you see testing done like this, it is in clear gelatin blocks. These are silicone-based blocks. They are said by the manufacturer to give the same results as 10% ballistic gelatin. That's not necessarily true. Ballistic gelatin, 10% ballistic gelatin needs to be mixed carefully. It needs to be aged, stored at certain temperatures. It is calibrated by means of a pump-up BB gun. And if you see people using calibrated gelatin, that kind of amber-colored gelatin, you will often see a BB in about 3 inches or so. And that is a calibration check with that BB to get within a certain depth range. That tells you the block is accurate. So that stuff works well in labs. It is the best means of testing we have. It does not work really well in the field. And it does not work really well for amateur testers. So when I met Dr. Fackler in 1990, he put me on a mission. He said, we know that the handgun bullets, like this punch, he said, they will behave almost exactly in water as they do in the 10% gelatin in terms of how much they expand or fragment and penetrate. It will be very similar. So the difference is he was firing them into test tanks at crime labs, which is just a big steel box full of water. So the bullet goes in so far, it expands, it fragments, it does what it's going to do, and then it loses energy and falls to the bottom of the tank. He said, we need to measure penetration depth, and we need to come up with a way to do that. Dr. Fackler first suggested using quart Ziploc bags. Fill them up with water, they're about 2 inches thick, stack them up. They didn't work out very well. You know, if you impacted some, the rest of them would burst open, the water would come out. It just didn't work. I eventually started using gallon plastic milk jugs. And when they're filled full of water, they're almost exactly 6 inches across. That's pretty coarse measurements in terms of penetration depth. So what I did was take a number of both pistol and rifle loads that I had shot in the gallon jugs full of water. And I was doing some consulting work for Hornady ammunition in Grand Island, Nebraska. And I kind of took my consulting fee out in 10% gelatin blocks in their underground shooting lab. And so I fired those same loads out of the same weapons in calibrated gelatin that I had done in water. And I was able to get down within about 2 inches of penetration. And if you're interested in doing that, the water system works really well up to about 17 or 1800 feet per second at most. There's a conversion factor because the bullets will go further in water than they do in the gelatin. And that conversion factor breaks down, as well as the expansion and fragmentation of rifle bullets is much more severe in water than it is in gelatin when you get above that 1800 feet per second threshold. So it's very accurate for pistol loads. It is not so accurate for rifle loads, but you can use it to compare one load to another. And I will put at the end a link to the video that shows you how to use the water jug test. There's a form I use. If you want that form, you can send me an email to my YouTube email address, and I'll be more than glad to send you a PDF version of that form you can use to fill out. There are a lot of misconceptions about what loads to carry in .38 snub nose revolvers. I happen to recommend, especially in the lightweight revolvers, I recommend wadcutters. I think they have several advantages. They're light recoil, they're accurate, and one big advantage is the blunt face of the bullet. Again, I'll show you close-ups. A wadcutter, if you shoot them into a target, they cut a nice clean hole. That's why they call them wadcutters. As opposed to a jacketed bullet, a hollow point, or a round-nosed lead or something like that, they just put a small hole in the paper. It does the same thing in flesh. The pointed bullet will kind of push aside the tissue and not cut a really clean hole, whereas that 3, 5, 7 diameter wadcutter with that sharp shoulder will cut. And those of you that are bow hunters, you know bow hunting arrows kill by cutting their way through with razor blades. And any blood vessel that is cut is going to bleed much more severely than one that is kind of pulled apart and torn by a blunt arrow, broadhead, or a more pointed style of bullet. Even an expanded hollow point like this punch, it's really a big, broad, flat, it just shoves the material out of the way. It doesn't really cut its way through. Whereas the wadcutter does. But there's a misconception that wadcutters will fail to go through heavy clothing and give adequate penetration. And that was one of the things I wanted to test today. And you'll see when I show you the water jug shooting. And this is a soft wadcutter. I also brought some hard cast wadcutters so that if the heavy clothing posed to be a problem, I was going to go to a harder bullet and see what it did. I didn't need the harder bullet. These soft swaged lead wadcutters, when I fired through the 4 layers of denim, and 4 layers of denim is not part of the FBI 8-part ammunition test that they use to test law enforcement ammunition. They have a heavy clothing test, but the standard of the industry nowadays has kind of become 4 layers of denim, 4 layers of blue jean material. And I had some old blue jeans that were worn. When I fired that soft wadcutter through 4 layers of denim, which I have not done denim testing on the jugs before, when I fired through 4 layers of denim, it went completely through 4 jugs and was caught in the 5th jug. So that means it went through 24, 26 inches of water. That's going to equate to about 15 or 16 inches of penetration in 10% gelatin, or roughly in tissue. And I will show you all this on a chart, but that soft wadcutter gave more than adequate penetration when it went through that heavy clothing layer of 4 layers of denim. Now the other 2 loads I tested was an old design, the 158 lead semi wadcutter hollow point plus P. Some people call this the FBI load, and it is indeed the load the FBI used when they fired revolvers. Winchester actually, I think, was the first to load it, and they still make it. It is the 38 SPD. And a contact of mine at Winchester told me years and years and years ago that the SPD actually stood for St. Louis PD. So the load was designed for them. It's a very soft lead semi-wadcutter with a hollow point in the end, and it tends to be one of the most reliable performers in a 38 that there is. In a test I did for a police marksman back in the early 90s, it was actually the highest rated individual load that we had looking at real world officer involved shooting. And I think a lot of that it was a pretty mild load to shoot, even though it's a plus P. And so the accuracy was good. You know, the hits are more important than anything else, point of impact. And so they were good solid center hits, and it worked really well. When I have never fired it through the 4 layers of denim. When I did, I had 6 jugs lined up. That's 36 inches of water, roughly 22 to 24 inches of gelatin penetration. And apparently that hollow point plugged with denim. It did not expand. It went through all 6 jugs. I also tested one of the newer loads out there, the Federal Punch 38 Special Plus P. It's a 120 grain jacketed hollow point. And again, going through the 4 layers of denim, it acted like a full metal jacket and went through all 6 jugs. So then I did a follow-up test with the Federal Punch with no denim. So this would be the equivalent of firing into bare jugs of water, bare gelatin blocks. And it was found in jug number 3. It marked the next of number 4. I'll have to run the numbers when I get back, and I will show you that on a chart. But that gave pretty decent performance in bare jugs. But when it came to the denim, it plugged up. So the 38 loads in the short barrel are going to be a little bit more cantankerous than they would be from a longer 4-inch barrel. More velocity gives you more reliable penetration and more reliable expansion. So from a snub nose, if you want to use a modern jacketed hollow point, I would get a short barreled load designed for short barrels, and several makers have them out now. But then I would test it with water jugs, and I would put some denim over there and see if they're going to plug up and penetrate. Now Hornady's critical defense and critical duty loads, which are available in 38, they have a red polymer that fills that hollow point, and that prevents the hollow point from being plugged up with debris from wood, plasterboard, clothing, or things like that. Because whenever that hollow point plugs up, the fluid can't get in there and cause that to expand. They act like a full metal jacket, and they give very, very deep penetration, but not a lot of extra tissue damage. So those plugged hollow points would be a really good choice for this. But from what I've seen, I still think the wadcutter is a good all-around load, and it has more of a tendency to cut its way through, to sever blood vessels rather than just shove them out of the way like an expanded hollow point or round nose lead. So that's what I wanted to do today, see how the snub nose performed with 3 different loads. There may be more loads that I test as we go along in this, but the point is, for those of you who call us a FUD, there's nothing wrong with a .38 revolver for self-defense. This is Federal Punch 120 grain jacketed hollow point plus P. All right, we went through the 4 layers of denim. First jug through and through. Second jug through and through. Third jug through and through. Fourth jug through and through. Fifth jug through and through. Sixth jug through and through. So apparently no expansion at all when going through the 4 layers of denim. This is Remington lead semi-wadcutter hollow point plus P, 4 layers of denim. Okay, first jug obviously through and through, second jug through and through, third jug through and through, fourth jug through and through, fifth jug through and through, sixth jug through and through. So no expansion at all with the lead semi-wadcutter hollow point through 4 layers of denim. This is a soft 148 full wadcutter, 4 layers of denim. Okay, number 1 jug through and through, 2, 3, 4, the slug is in jug number 5. Now this is not a hollow base wadcutter. This is a double end swaged soft wadcutter. You can see there's virtually no expansion at all. This is the little tiny bit of expansion on the end that impacted. It was in jug number 5. Now I'm looking to see if there's a mark where it impacted on the jug, and it did not. So it fully penetrated 4 in jug number 5. No mark on the back of the jug. This is the Federal Punch 120 grain jacketed hollow point plus P. No heavy clothing, bare jugs, equivalent of bare gelatin. The denim kept me from getting wet. Okay, there are only 5 jugs in the stack this time. First one is destroyed. Second one ripped up pretty good. Third one did not penetrate through. So the bullet is in the 3rd jug. It barely broke the back of jug number 3, and it made a mark on jug number 4. It did not break number 4, so there's no liquid running out. So that's a marked next, marked the next jug. Completely through 2, actually completely through 3, marked the front of the 4th. Nice expansion. You can see that many of the jacketed pedals ripped off. There was one jacketed pedal in jug number 3. So this gave no expansion whatsoever with the 4 layers of denim. Completely plugged the hollow point, acted like a full metal jacket. Bare jugs or bare gelatin equivalent. Pretty nice expansion, and we'll check the penetration and get that number to you. Yeah, I know you only got 5 or 6 rounds. I know it's slower to load, and I know those 20 shooters are going to load in the morning and shoot all day. But do you really need that many rounds? There are a lot of people who will put comments on there, oh, but so many people are engaging more multiple adversaries in the shoots. Show me where. I know that's another common thing that we hear, but I don't see it borne out that much by statistics, either for police officers or concealed carry holders. They're not engaging 6 adversaries very often. 1, maybe 2, and if you make hits with 5 or 6 shots, you can deal with 1 or 2. So the snub is still viable. Here's some information on loads that will perform for you, and I hope the information is useful to you. If it is, I ask you to subscribe, resubscribe as needed, give me a thumbs up. Folks, most of all, I hope you enjoy these videos, and y'all be safe out there. Okay, we got them both here now. You ready? Bud got one. Ginger got one. Oh, she missed it. She usually gets them, doesn't she, Bud? Okay, girl, last one. You ready? You ready? Yeah! That's all there is till next time.